Discouragement, we all feel it. It's those times when the sickness doesn't want to go away, or the marriage is on the rocks, or the kids are just a disaster. So how can we stop from being discouraged? Join us today as we continue in the book of Acts. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Acts in 10-ish series. Glad you're joining us. Last week, we started talking about the subject of discouragement. And what brought that subject up was we met a man by the name of Barnabas, and he was considered the encourager. And that's exactly what the early church needed. The followers of Jesus in the early church needed to be encouraged because they were coming against a lot of stuff, Rome and Jews and just and following Jesus. It was also new and they didn't really know what to do. So there was a lot of discouragement going on. And I realized that we all need to be encouraged in our life because life is really difficult, whether you were the early church or whether you're the church of 2024. But we all need someone to come alongside of us to lift us up, to help us keep going when things get tough. So today I want to talk about discouragement in hopes that those of you that are feeling that way will be encouraged. So let's start here with what gets us discouraged. Discouragement comes from a lot of different things. Sometimes it's just unfinished tasks that just pile up. Discouragement happens maybe when you're sick and you just can't, you don't have time to be sick, and so you start feeling discouraged because you just aren't getting better faster. Some of you are discouraged because you have kids and maybe your child just broke his arm or broke his leg and you're just like, I don't have time for all of this. And you just fall into discouragement, like, is this ever going to get better? Discouragement can happen when you feel like you failed at something. Maybe it's a business deal, the deal falls through, or maybe you have an event and nobody really shows up. And discouragement can happen in so many different ways. Maybe sometimes it's when you just can't seem to get ahead. You always seem to be behind on everything. Someone wrote this and I thought it was cute. Just when I think I can make ends meet, somebody moves the ends. Because that's another way of discouragement. Like we feel like I just can't make things happen. I can't make ends meet. Nothing is working any longer. And every time I try, it's like someone just moves the bar. And I'm like, we all understand that. But discouragement can also happen when we're afraid, we're fearful. We're afraid of the future. What's going to happen? I'm afraid of my 16-year-old getting his driver's license. I'm afraid for when the kids go to college. I'm afraid of retirement. And then we can just feel so overwhelmed and discouraged just because we're afraid. Discouragement can happen, like I said, lots of different ways. How about this one? We're discouraged when we're tired of being a parent. I think we've all felt that way if we have children. Someone said this once, and I thought it was cute. Don't be discouraged if your children reject your advice. Years later, they will offer it to their own offspring. I'm like, that's just so true. That's just the reality of being a parent. But some people are discouraged because they're just tired of being a wife, tired of being an employee, tired of work, just tired of everything. So here are kind of a couple little practical tips to help you when you feel that way. First, if you feel overwhelmed because your schedule's so busy and the kids and your husband and life and grocery stores and everything, and you just are overwhelmed, you need to stop and you need to give yourself some rest. One of our sons is studying to go to dental school, and the amount of information that he has to retain is just overwhelming. And he calls and he'll be like, I just feel so discouraged. I just feel like this is never going to end. I'm so exhausted from this. And the only thing we could tell him was this: how do you eat an elephant? If I were going to eat an elephant, how would you do it? And the answer is one bite at a time. There's a big elephant. You can't just shove the whole elephant in your mouth. It's one tiny little bite at a time. And some of you that feel like you're just so overwhelmed with life, you need to start making a checklist and do one thing until it's done and check it off. And not get overwhelmed by the rest until it's just one thing at a time, one bite of the elephant at a time. Instead of looking at all the things, the whole elephant that you have to do in one day, just take a foot or a toe or a tail or something of that elephant and do it. And then you're going to have to train yourself to say, you know what, I'm a human being and I can only do this much. And just work to get what you can get done for that day. But here's what I think, and I think we learned this from Elijah last week. Start your morning focused on God. Like that needs to begin the day. Like ask him, say, God, you know the day that I have today, and I need you to help me make it through and get these things done. And some of you are like, well, I don't even have time to read my Bible. Well, maybe wake up 15 minutes early. You're like, but I'm so tired. Okay, I get that. But when you start your morning off focused on the one thing that matters, which is Jesus, then suddenly during the day, it kind of starts your day off understanding, refocusing yourself back to, what am I supposed to be doing? Well, I'm supposed to be loving God first, serving him, loving him most, seeking him. Like when he comes first, then everything else seems to come into focus at that time. Maybe pick up the Bible and read a psalm, Psalms 1 today and Psalms 2 tomorrow, and just pray, God, help me to focus on you today. But God has to be our first priority. If we say we're a follower of Jesus, if we're a born again follower of Jesus, then we follow him first and everything else comes after that. And he knows what needs to be done in your life. Like none of that is shocking to him. We saw last week with Elijah, when we talked about him, he was very, very discouraged. But what we learned from him last week is that we have to come back to seeking God first. We're going to feel overwhelmed in life if we don't make him a priority, if we don't get a God perspective on our life, because the world is vying for our attention. Our kids, our husbands, everyone's vying for our attention. But when that happens, we move our focus off of what God's perspective is for our life. And that is that we're a follower of his. And we're supposed to be serving him during the day. And we can serve him lots of different ways. As we're being a mother, as we're being a wife, as we're going to the grocery store, all of those things. But we have to remember to keep our focus on him. Another thing that I was thinking is we need to remember that there are seasons. Life is filled with seasons. Some are going to be way busier than others. Elijah had to learn this. He was a prophet. He would just walk around and talk about God and give people a word from the Lord. And then there was a famine for 3 years, and he couldn't do what he used to do. And now he's kind of stuck by a brook with water, and that was about what his 3 years looked like. It was completely different. And then he when the drought's over, he goes and has a showdown with, the false prophets of Baal. And this is a big deal. And he's exhausted from it. And he kills a bunch of false prophets. And it's a different season. And so what he had to learn through each situation is that you have to keep your eyes focused on the prize. And the prize is God. Like that's just what we have to do. Knowing that they're all going to be different seasons, but you can still focus on God during those seasons. What we realize is that a lot of you are discouraged because of the season you're in. Some of you have little infants at home. That's really hard. Some of you have kids that are going to soccer one night and dance the next and gymnastics the next, and you are so discouraged. You're like, is my life ever going to become normal again? There are seasons then when all of your kids go off to college or they get married and they leave home and you have the empty nest, part of your life. There's just seasons in life. And instead of getting discouraged in the season, we have to go, all right, this is the season I'm in, and I'm going to be the best follower of Jesus in this season that I can possibly be. Some of our kids have little kids at home right now, and I just look at them. I'm thankful I'm not there anymore, but I see how exhausted they are, just how discouraging it can be. I just had a call from Cheyenne this morning, and her daughter Susie, she's almost 2, but she's just doing what 2-year-olds do. They can't talk, so they hit. So she pushes kids or hits kids or whatever, and Cheyenne's so frustrated, and she feels so discouraged as a parent. And I keep saying to her, Cheyenne, you have to understand this, that power through it. Power through, it's just a season. Susie's not going to be 2 forever. She's not going to hit little kids forever. When she can start using her words, she'll be able to tell you why she's frustrated without having to go and hit someone. But it's just a season. And so knowing all that, we understand we can get discouraged, and there could be a whole bunch of different reasons for it. But as we looked at Elijah last week, we just have to remember that once he got his focus back to where it should be, then it seemed to take the discouragement away. I was reading this about Adrian Rogers. Adrian Rogers was the former president of the Southern Baptist Church, and he felt discouraged. And it wasn't because of family or kids or soccer or all those things. He felt discouraged because he would get up and preach, and he would say, if anyone wants to come to Jesus, please come forward. And nobody really came forward. And he felt so discouraged. So he went home and he opened his Bible and he asked God, he said, God, I need your perspective on what's going on in my life. And he opened his Bible, and the verse that popped out at him was this one. It says, they are not rejecting you, but me. The Bible said, they are not rejecting you, Adrian, but me. Jesus is saying this. And after that, Adrian Rogers says he never worried about the results of his invitations anymore, knowing that people were not rejecting what he was saying, but rejecting the God behind what he was saying. And it took all the pressure off. It took all the pressure off. And he just needed to be reminded that where he is at this season in his life, it's a season that he's supposed to serve God regardless of the outcome of what happens. And it's the same thing with raising kids. It's our job to raise our kids, to tell them about Jesus. But I can't change our kids' lives. I can't change our grandkids' lives. It's God's job to do that. And when you can rest in that, the discouragement will go away. You're like, it's not my job. Cheyenne said this morning, she goes, maybe it's my fault that Susie hits. And I started laughing. I'm like, I have no idea why that would be your fault, but it's because, and you can take all that on and then get discouraged. Don't do that. I said, it's your job to raise her and teach her not to hit. Beyond that, it's God's deal. And somehow knowing that seems to take away our discouragement. We carry so much pressure on us thinking that it's our job to do this or that. And most things, it's just God's job. God has to change Susie's heart. God has to give her a desire for him. God has to change who she is as a person. Like, this is God's job, not ours. I thought about this when I read this. Mother Teresa, she was attending a party full of dignitaries. And the guest list included like presidents and statements from statesmen around the world. And they all came with their crowns and their jewels and their silks and all of this. And Mother Teresa showed up in her sari, I think it's called, S-A-R-I, sari, held together by a safety pin. Like, this is how she showed up. She was talking to one of the noblemen, and he was so intrigued by what was going on in Calcutta. But from his vantage point, he just said, your work has to be so frustrating. He said, how do you not get discouraged when you see so few successes? And she looked at him and she says, I actually don't get discouraged. She said, God called me to be not into a ministry of success. Like, my ministry is not one of success. Mine is a ministry of mercy. That's it. I just go, I be merciful, I do what I'm supposed to do. The rest is up to God. And that's why she doesn't have to get discouraged. If she helps 100 people and 95 of them die on her, well, that's not her deal. She did her job, what God called her to do, and the rest is up to him. She doesn't have to be discouraged about that. And I thought that was a really good word for us. See, we have to have this really high view of God. God is big. He can do anything. And when we have that view of him, then we find our discouragement being less and less. I look at that with me. God has called me to be a mother, a wife, a grandmother, a Bible teacher. And every one of those things can feel discouraging sometimes until I add God into the picture. And then I go, I need to stop making my life about me. Poor me, I can't do this, and I'm too busy, and blah, blah, blah. I need to say, God, I'm just here to serve you. I'm going to do the best I can in all of those things that you gave me. But you know what? You're in charge of the outcome. And when you take the pressure off of yourself, you'll become less and less discouraged. There was a story of a seminary where your final year, you had to, write out a sermon and then preach it in front of the staff, the students and the faculty. And what they would do is they would critique your sermon afterwards. And on this particular morning, a guy by the name of Ken Jones gets up and he does his sermon. And at the At the very end, the president or the principal got up and said this, "Mr. Jones, you would have been better off to stand up this morning and say, 'I have no word from the Lord,' and then just sit down." What? I mean, how discouraging can someone be? And I don't even know what happened to Ken Jones after that, whether he went on to become a pastor or whether he just gave up. But I suspect that those words that principal said to him were words of death. And every time he stood up to publicly speak, that's the only thing he heard. Discouragement can do that to us. It can stop us in our tracks. It can stop us in our ministry. It can stop us in our calling. It can stop us in so way. If you hear so much, you're the worst mother and you're the worst, wife and you're the worst, like it's so debilitating. But it's debilitating here. If we don't keep our focus on what God is calling us to do, that's when it's debilitating. It's debilitating if we listen to the voices around us and stop listening to God. And we don't want that to happen. I hear stories all the time. People will write me and they'll be like, "Lisa, this is my story." And they'll tell me their story. And they'll say, "I want to write a book." And you know what I say to them? I say, "You can't do that. Nobody's going to publish you. You have to be famous. That's a bad idea." No, I don't say that. Okay. That would be horrible if I said something like that. But here's what I do say. Yes, you absolutely should write a book. Write your story down, get it down. Self-publishing is readily available. Imagine how your story can help so many people. Write it, self-publish it, order 10 copies, and give the 10 copies to people who you think you need. Like your story, if it helps one person, that's all that matters. But imagine if you were encouraged like that by those around you. Imagine if the church you go to, the friends, your neighborhood group, that they were your greatest cheerleader. We don't see that much today. We see a lot of negativity, and you can't do that, and you're not supposed to do that. We don't hear a lot of encouragement. Imagine if you told them you wanted to write a book and they were so excited about it. Imagine if things really didn't go as planned that you thought, and they're right there to lift you up. Try again, you can do it. Imagine if you actually do become successful with your book and they're excited, because a lot of people don't like, other people's success. But that's how we should be. We should be the most encouraging people around. And so to get through encouragement or discouragement, you need someone in your life that will encourage you. When Elijah was all done with his pity party and all that, God gave him someone, Elisha, and to kind of like take over and be with him towards the end. So today let's see how to be an encourager like Barnabas, because this is where we're going to pick up. And I'm just going to share one really quick thing on how Barnabas encouraged the apostles. And last week we were getting a glimpse into the early church, and I laugh. They didn't look like our church today. This was funny. A pastor, he was preaching and he looked out to the congregation and he noticed that most of them were asleep. And so he stopped the sermon and asked the deacon to pass the offering plate. Well, the deacon woke up red-faced, embarrassed that he'd fallen asleep, and he said, "But Pastor, we already gave the offering, passed the offering plate." And the pastor said, "Well, never mind that, take up another one." He said, "I intend to make them pay for lodging as well as spiritual food." I was like, okay, that's perfect. But I can imagine how discouraged that pastor must have been. But what we're finding in Acts is one man. We'll pick it up in Acts 4:36. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. This is the Barnabas, the son of encouragement. Like that was who they called him, because he just encouraged people. And this was encouraging. The one thing he did here in verse 37, he sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. Now, I never really understood why Barnabas selling land and giving it to the apostles would be encouraging until we started our ministry. Because ministry is expensive. And you walk into ministry going, I don't know, am I supposed to be doing this? I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing this. And all along the way, what encouraged me the most is when someone donated money. As dumb as that sounds, it was like, I know I've told you this before, like the first money we ever got in, someone handed me a check or handed me an envelope with $1,000 in it and said, "This is for your ministry." And I always say, I didn't know we had a ministry at the time. But that was the most encouraging thing that happened well over 20 years ago that sticks out in my brain. It encouraged me to keep going. Then we had a lady one time who sold her house, and we had no money at the time. I was like, God, we have no money. And she calls and asks to go to lunch, and she hands me a check. I think it was like for $5,000 or some crazy thing. She's like, I wanted to tithe to your ministry from my house. I mean, I could give you hundreds of stories like that where God just came through. And he used people to give, and that was encouraging. So your church is encouraged when you give. Ministry that you support is encouraged when you give. And I never really understood that until, because I'm in ministry now, it makes so much sense why they probably called him Son of Encouragement. So all that to say is, I was thinking, why is that? And I think it's because I know how important money is to you. And so if you're going to take your hard-earned money and support our ministry, or your pastor is going to say, hey, I know you got hard-earned money and you're going to give it to the church, there's something that encourages us. We were talking to a pastor a long time ago, and many years ago, Rob sold a business and we had some extra money that we were going to tithe. And this particular church was doing their very first fundraiser. They were trying to buy some property. And so Rob went to talk to the pastor and told him what he wanted to donate. And 20 years later, the pastor came to Rob and he said, Rob, you will never know what that day did to me. When you came to me and told me you were going to donate, he said, that encouraged me more than you'll ever know. He said, I was scared to death. Like, nobody knew that, but I was terrified because I was standing up there thinking, no one's going to donate. No one's going to do this. And I'm going to look really stupid up here. And he said, when you said that, it was an encouragement to keep going because I realized then that God was in it. So that's how, when I look at this passage, I'm like, okay, that makes sense that money and encouragement can be tied together. Let's try to be like this. 56 years ago, which is probably more than that now. Let's just go to June 18th, 1956. I guess that's what I meant to say. A freak accident happened in the Lake of New York. A lake in New York. It'd be nice if I could talk today. A speeding motorboat bounced on the waves, but hit a wave, shot two of the passengers out of the boat, a 50-year-old man and a little girl. To keep her from drowning, the man held her head above the water while another boat came and got her, but took her out and then had to make another circle. But by the time it got back to him, the man sank and drowned. And that is how Dawson Trotman died. He's the founder of the Navigators, an international discipleship ministry. According to a quote in Times Magazine, they said this: he lived to save others. His death was just the way he would have planned it. In his obituary, someone wrote that he died just the way he lived, always lifting someone up. And that is Barnabas, lifting other people up. And that's what we should be doing. And so I want you to lift other people up and find someone when you need to be lifted up. But always remember this: your life is filled with seasons. If you're in one of those crazy seasons, just take one bite of the elephant at a time. But remember that as a follower of Jesus, your life is about serving him. So always focus on whatever you're doing that you're so busy, that he always comes first, whether it's changing diapers or working at Target. Do not let discouragement overtake you, because God, he has you right there in that season for such a time as this. And he's like, I don't need you to be discouraged. I need you to be the best follower of me, follower of Jesus, that you could possibly be during those difficult times. Hopefully that helped you today. Have a really good day.